Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a real world cautionary tale today, and it perfectly captures, honestly, one of the most dangerous traps in business. We're going to look at how the exact trait that makes a founder wildly successful can literally, almost overnight, become the very thing that pushes their company right to the edge of total destruction. It's really a story about that super fine line between being a visionary leader and just willful blindness. There's this incredible irony built right into startup culture. Think about it. We constantly celebrate founders for their unwavering certainty, right? We praise them for shutting out all the noise and just pushing forward against all the odds. But there's a huge hidden danger here. It raises a pretty critical question. At what point does that celebrated certainty actually start to sink the ship? Like, when does shutting out the noise actually mean you're shutting out the voices of the exact people keeping your lights on? To figure out how this happens, let's set the stage a bit. Picture the early 2010s. This startup founder builds a project management software company, and I mean, it takes off like an absolute rocket. Just 2 years in, they've got thousands of paying customers. On paper, the ultimate success story. This founder was famous for shipping product ridiculously fast, making these incredibly bold calls and operating with just absolute conviction, zero analysis paralysis. And because of that, his investors absolutely loved him, and his team deeply admired how certain he always was. The key concept to understand here is something called founder's conviction. Now, early on, this was for sure his superpower. It meant he trusted his own vision for the product above almost anything else. But here is exactly where the trap gets set. See, this intense conviction slowly morphed. It turned into this deeply held belief that his customers didn't actually know what they needed. He started to believe that figuring out the product was 100% his job, not theirs. He'd built a whole company on pure instinct, and he basically decided, no way am I letting a support inbox dictate how I run my business. Well, that mindset triggered what was basically a slow-moving car crash. Let's walk through this timeline, because it is agonizing. They start with that massive fast growth in the early 2010s. But then, as they really scale into that first major year of mass adoption, the support tickets start piling up. We move into the next year, and while our founder is just completely ignoring those tickets, a smaller competitor is quietly building exactly what those customers are asking for. Now, for the next 2 quarters, rising revenue completely masks the creeping churn. It hides all those quiet cancellations from people just sneaking out the back door. Until suddenly the dam breaks, and a full third of their customer base just vanishes. So what exactly were those customers asking for during that whole long build-up? Well, there were 3 very specific, constantly reoccurring requests hitting the support inbox. They wanted a simpler onboarding flow, better mobile support, and an integration with a tool that nearly half the customer base was already using. Now, picture this scene. The head of customer success brings a compiled summary of these massive reoccurring complaints into this super critical leadership meeting. And the founder? He waves the whole thing off in under 2 minutes. His exact words were basically, "We're not going to chase every feature request. We know where this product needs to go." Over the next year, this turns into a massive, massive deception. Feature requests get filed, then completely forgotten. The support team flags customers as a churn risk, but product management never even follows up. And you might be wondering, why didn't anyone sound a louder alarm? Simple, because revenue just kept climbing for another 2 full quarters. That top-line growth made it so easy for leadership to just sit back and assume everything was perfectly fine. But right underneath that shiny revenue number, that smaller, scrappier competitor was listening really closely to the exact complaints this founder was completely ignoring. And then we hit the breaking point. That smaller competitor's product caught on like wildfire. Customers who had been quietly frustrated for well over a year suddenly had a real, viable alternative. Basically, a product that did the exact thing they'd been begging for since day one. So that slow leak of churn, it instantly turned into a devastating flood, and it wiped out a full 33%, a third of their entire customer base in just one single quarter. As you'd expect, the immediate fallout was brutal. Layoffs happened pretty quickly right after that mass exodus of customers. Total panic sets in at the highest levels of the company. So the board of directors steps in. They bring in an external advisor to do a forensic deep dive into what went so disastrously wrong. And what she found? It completely flipped the entire narrative. Because she didn't find a product problem. No, looking through 18 months of logs, she found a massive, systemic listening problem. Okay, are you ready for the massive plot twist of our explainer today? 11. That integration, the one customers eventually left the company to go get, had actually been raised by the support staff to the leadership team 11 separate times. And that was just before the founder did his little 2-minute dismissal in that fateful meeting. It was brought up so many more times after that, the data was literally sitting there the entire time.
So when the advisor actually sits down and presents this staggering failure to the founder face-to-face, his very first instinct is to get super defensive. He tries to justify his original call. But then she asks him this one pivotal question. She says, "How many of these customers told you exactly what they wanted in their own words before they left?" And wow, that was the moment the illusion totally shattered. The founder finally realized that for the last 18 months, he hadn't actually been protecting some grand product vision. He'd just been protecting his own certainty. And his company paid a massive, massive price for his ego.
So how in the world do you recover from a blind spot that large? Well, to his credit, the founder didn't just make some frantic one-off decision to quickly code the missing feature and issue a PR apology. Actually, he fundamentally changed the structural habits of the entire company. He realized that fixing this meant building a structure that made listening absolutely unavoidable. It couldn't just be some optional exercise you do only when things are going well. He implemented this really effective 3-step playbook, and honestly, any of you could apply this to your own teams right now. First off, a direct customer feedback loop was strictly mandated in leadership meetings. Every 2 weeks, they had to look at the top 5 recurring requests using verbatim customer quotes. No sanitizing it, no summarizing, no filtering, just the raw feedback. Second, the founder himself started sitting in on support calls once a week, unannounced for a full hour, just to hear exactly where customers were getting stuck. And third, the team finally got to work and shipped that highly requested integration within 4 months. Now, the recovery definitely wasn't instant. Within about 6 months, the bleeding stopped and the churn started to stabilize. But it took them nearly 2 full years to rebuild all the customer trust they'd squandered. But the founder actually admitted in interviews later on that this near collapse was the absolute best thing that ever happened to his leadership style. It put him through this painful but totally necessary crucible. He finally learned how to separate the concept of having conviction from the really toxic habit of refusing to listen. And really, that's the ultimate takeaway here. There is a massive, massive difference between vision and avoidance. Obviously, confidence matters in leadership. Having vision and conviction, totally essential. But when you refuse to treat customer feedback as real, valid information, until the financial cost becomes literally impossible to ignore, well, that's just avoidance. The profound lesson here is that conviction without any kind of structural listening isn't actually vision at all. It's just hiding from reality. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. I really want you to apply this to your own career, your own projects, maybe even your daily meetings. When you dismiss critical feedback or when you wave off data that completely contradicts your gut feeling, are you genuinely protecting your vision? Or are you just protecting your certainty? Take some time to think carefully about the structures you have in place to make sure you're actually hearing the warnings before it's too late. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive today, and I really challenge you to take a hard look at how you handle feedback this week.